Hello. I always thought I was good at reading people. I mean, I've spent my life in the business world, where you have to know who's telling the truth, who's lying, and who's just plain useless. So, when things with Sarah started to feel off, I told myself I'd see through it. You'd think I'd spot it a mile away if my own wife was cheating on me. And yet, somehow, I didn't. At least not at first. It wasn't the kind of thing you notice in one big moment. It was subtle, a few missed calls, texts that didn't get a reply as quickly as they used to. At first, I figured it was just the usual marriage stuff. We'd been together for 8 years by then, and things weren't as exciting as they used to be. That's normal, right? People get busy, routines settle in, and the thrill fades. But this was different. It wasn't just the fizzling of romance or the lull of everyday life. Something felt distant, detached, like she was slipping away from me and I didn't know how to pull her back. It was ironic, really, because if anyone was guilty of pulling away, it was me. I'd been the one who had messed up first. It's not something I'm proud of, but a couple of years ago, I had an affair. It didn't last long, just a fling that happened on a business trip when I was too drunk to make the right choice. I never told Sarah. I convinced myself it was a one-time thing, and burying it would save our marriage. I thought if I just pretended it didn't happen, everything would be fine. But deep down, I knew I had cracked something in our foundation. Still, Sarah never said a word. She didn't seem to suspect a thing, or if she did, she was a better actress than I gave her credit for. Things went back to normal, or what I thought was normal, until about 6 months ago. That's when I first started to suspect something wasn't right. It was small stuff at first. She'd come home late from work more often, always with some vague excuse about meetings running late or traffic being worse than usual. She'd leave the room to take phone calls, saying it was just a friend or a work thing. But it wasn't the explanations that bothered me. It was the way she gave them. There was something too casual about it, like she was putting on a performance. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening, but I didn't want to come off as paranoid. Maybe I was projecting my own guilt onto her, imagining things that weren't there. I didn't want to believe it, but once that seed of doubt was planted, it grew fast. I started watching her more closely, not just her actions but her mood. She seemed distracted, absent. Even when we were in the same room, it was like she wasn't really there. We'd sit on the couch watching TV, and I'd notice her staring off into space, her phone lighting up on the table next to her. She'd smile at it, just a little, before turning the screen over. When I asked her what was so funny, she'd brush it off. Oh, nothing. Just Julia being Julia. Julia, her best friend, who was going through her own messy divorce at the time. For a while, I bought it. After all, Julia had been in Sarah's ear for months about how men were untrustworthy pigs, that she should always keep her options open and never get too comfortable. I figured Sarah was just being a supportive friend, and maybe all this drama with Julia was rubbing off on her. But as the weeks passed, the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Then came the night that really pushed me over the edge. We had plans to have dinner at home, something simple, just the two of us. I'd picked up groceries on my way back from work, expecting her to be there when I got home, but when I walked in, the house was empty. She hadn't even texted to say she'd be late. An hour passed, then 2, and still no word. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't since the night I cheated on her: panic. By the time she walked through the door, it was nearly 10 o'clock. She looked flustered, and when I asked her where she'd been, she mumbled something about work running late again. That was the moment I knew. I didn't have proof, not yet, but I knew. I could have confronted her then, but I didn't. Maybe I was scared of what she'd say, or maybe I wanted to be smarter about it. After all, I knew how to deal with lies. I'd told enough of them myself. So, instead of exploding, I played it cool. I told her I understood, that work can get crazy sometimes, and I dropped it. But the next day, I made a plan. I reached out to a few mutual friends, people Sarah trusted, people who wouldn't suspect anything if they asked her a few harmless questions. I wanted to know if she was telling them the same stories she was telling me. If she had slipped up, they'd be the ones to notice. It took a couple of weeks, but my patience paid off. One of our friends, Mike, came to me and said something strange. He'd been at a work function with Sarah the night I'd made dinner, the same night she'd come home late. According to Mike, Sarah left early, saying she had plans with me, but she never showed up until hours later. That was the final nail in the coffin. She was lying. I was angry, sure, but mostly I felt this cold clarity. I knew now that I wasn't crazy or paranoid. Something was going on, and if I wanted to catch her, I had to be smart about it. I didn't confront her right away, even after Mike's revelation. I needed more than just suspicion and inconsistencies. I needed proof. Something undeniable. If I was going to call her out, it had to be definitive. Maybe that was the businessman in me, always needing leverage before making a move. The next step came naturally, almost too easy. I asked another mutual friend, Lisa, to help me set up a kind of test. Sarah trusted Lisa completely. They'd been friends for years. I figured if Sarah was hiding something, Lisa could help draw it out. The plan was simple. Lisa would invite Sarah for drinks, just the two of them, and casually steer the conversation towards relationships, fidelity, and, if she could get her there, any hint of Sarah's extracurricular activities. It was a long shot. I knew that. Sarah wasn't stupid. She wouldn't confess to something so easily. But Lisa was persuasive, and maybe Sarah was feeling the weight of guilt by then. Maybe she'd slip. 2 nights later, Lisa and Sarah went out. I was on edge the entire time, pacing the living room, half hoping that I was wrong and that Sarah would come home as if nothing had happened, and half hoping for a confession, something to finally justify what I'd been feeling. When Sarah came back that night, she was tipsy, laughing at something Lisa had said, her hair slightly disheveled, like she'd been letting loose for the first time in weeks. She kissed me on the cheek when she walked in and fell onto the couch, babbling on about how much fun she'd had. But underneath the surface, I could sense something was wrong. There was this fake warmth in her voice, like she was trying to play the role of the carefree wife. The ease in which she slipped into this act only made me angrier, but I kept my cool. The next morning, Lisa called me. She didn't say much, Lisa began, a note of hesitation in her voice. But she did mention someone. A guy. My stomach twisted. Who? She didn't give me a name, Lisa admitted, but she hinted that she's been seeing someone. Someone from work, I think. She was vague about it, like she wasn't sure if she wanted to tell me or not. But it was pretty clear she's hiding something. There it was. It wasn't solid proof yet, but it was close enough. I was livid. I felt this tight ball of fury form in my chest, and I had to clench my fists to stop myself from smashing the phone against the wall. How does she? After everything we'd been through, after everything I had buried to keep us together, this was how she repaid me? By sleeping with some guy from work? But then something else dawned on me. Sarah had been talking about work, yes, but what if this wasn't just some random colleague? What if there was something more? A deeper betrayal? My mind started running in circles, and suddenly, I remembered Julia, Sarah's best friend. Julia had been going through a rough time since her divorce from Mark, her ex-husband. Could it be him? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. But then the pieces started to fit together. Sarah had been spending more time with Julia lately, offering support during the divorce. What if, in the process, she had gotten close to Mark? What if she had crossed a line? The idea made me sick, but I couldn't shake it. I needed to know. That weekend, I decided to test my theory. I suggested we invite Julia over for dinner, just the 3 of us. Sarah seemed hesitant at first, but eventually agreed, probably thinking it would help her keep up the facade. I watched her closely the whole night, especially when Julia mentioned her ex-husband. It was subtle, but I saw it, the brief flicker of something in Sarah's eyes. Guilt? Shame? I wasn't sure, but it was enough to make me dig deeper. The next day, I took matters into my own hands. I started looking through her phone, not my proudest moment, but at that point, I didn't care about playing fair. It wasn't hard to find. Hidden in a folder under work emails was a string of messages from someone labeled M. I didn't need a degree in detective work to figure out who M was. It was Mark. The messages weren't explicit, not at first glance, but they were intimate. Conversations about feelings, about secrets they shared. And then there were a few that left no room for doubt. References to nights they'd spent together, moments when they'd met in secret. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Sarah had been sleeping with Julia's ex-husband. Of all people, It wasn't just infidelity. It was betrayal on a whole different level. She had broken our marriage vows, but she'd also violated her friendship with Julia. The realization hit me like a wave. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the lies and the disrespect, the complete disregard for everything we had built together. I wanted to confront her then and there, but something stopped me. I don't know if it was the cold rage simmering under the surface, or if I wanted to hurt her as much as she had hurt me, but I decided to hold off. I wanted to see how far she would take it, how much she thought she could get away with. So I played dumb. I acted like everything was fine, like I hadn't uncovered her little secret. I let her go about her day, pretending I didn't notice the lies, the sneaky texts, the late nights. I wanted her to think she was in control, that she was fooling me. But I was the one who had the upper hand now. And then, when the time was right, I'd confront her. I'd make her confess, and I'd watch as everything she thought she was getting away with crumbled around her. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. What started as my plan to catch her in the act quickly spiraled into something much darker, something I couldn't control. I waited, holding onto my anger like a weapon I wasn't ready to use. Every night, I watched Sarah closely, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the more I waited, the more I started to realize something else was happening. Sarah wasn't just sneaking around. She was unraveling. Slowly but surely, the confident, composed woman I married was falling apart right in front of me, and I almost didn't notice at first. It started small. She was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. When we talked, she barely made eye contact, and when she thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch her staring off into space, her face tight with worry. I chalked it up to guilt at first, thinking she was feeling the weight of her betrayal. But then there were the sleepless nights. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., and she'd be lying there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like she was afraid to close them. I thought it was just her conscience eating away at her. And, to be honest, I didn't care. She deserved to feel like that. I told myself. She'd lied to me, betrayed me. If she was suffering, then it was her own doing. But something inside me hesitated. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just guilt. Sarah wasn't just afraid of getting caught. She was afraid of something else. It was as if she was haunted, like she was walking around with a ghost on her shoulders. I told myself I'd find out what it was soon enough. One night, after she had spent the entire day avoiding me, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to confront her. I had the texts, I had the proof. The pieces had all fallen into place, and now it was time to see if she'd come clean or try to worm her way out of it. Either way, I wanted her to see that I knew. It was late, past midnight, and she was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, pretending like everything was normal. I sat across from her, watching her for a moment, before I finally spoke. "You gonna tell me what's going on?" She looked up, startled, like she didn't even realize I was there. "What do you mean?" Her voice was too calm, too casual, like she was trying to deflect. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "You know what I mean, Sarah. I'm not stupid." Her face went pale, and she opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She set her phone down slowly, carefully, like she was buying time, trying to figure out her next move. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice cold. "Or should I say who's been keeping you so busy?" She blinked rapidly, her hand shaking as she reached up to touch her hair, a nervous habit she'd had since we first met. "I don't know what you're talking about." I almost laughed. Even now, she was trying to lie. But I didn't let her off the hook. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder with the text from M, and tossed it onto the table in front of her. "Still don't know what I'm talking about?" Sarah's eyes darted to the screen, and when she saw the messages, her whole body seemed to deflate. She didn't even try to grab the phone. She just sat there, staring at it, like all the energy had drained out of her at once. For a moment, we were both silent, the air thick between us. Then, she broke. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she'd hurt me, how much she'd betrayed me. But when I looked at her, all I saw was someone who was completely broken. Her shoulders were slumped, her hands trembling in her lap. She couldn't even look me in the eye. Why? I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Why would you do this? She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know. I don't know. That's not good enough, Sarah. My voice hardened again. I deserve more than that. After everything we've been through, after all the lies. I didn't know how else to cope, she cut in, her voice cracking. You hurt me. After what happened with you, I felt so lost. And Mark, he was just there. I didn't plan it, I swear. It just happened. Mark. Hearing his name again made me feel sick. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my temper in check. So, this is my fault? I asked bitterly. You're blaming me for this? No. I mean, I don't know. She was crying now, her breath hitching in her chest. I felt like I couldn't trust you anymore. I felt so alone, like I wasn't enough for you. And when Julia and Mark got divorced, I was there for him, and he was there for me. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I swear, I didn't mean for it to. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was justifying it. She was trying to explain away the fact that she'd been sleeping with her best friend's ex-husband, as if that somehow made it better. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how disgusting it was. But the look on her face stopped me. She wasn't defiant. She wasn't trying to justify it out of pride. She was lost. Completely and utterly lost. So, what now? I asked, my voice cold again. What do you want to do? Because we sure as hell can't go back to the way things were. I don't know, she whispered, wiping her face. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us. That was the first moment I considered what came next. I knew our marriage was broken beyond repair, but part of me wondered if there was a way to salvage something from the wreckage, but not in the traditional sense. I was tired of the lies, tired of the game. Maybe there was another way. An open relationship, I said finally, testing the words in my mouth. If you want him, fine. But this, I gestured between us, this doesn't work if you're sneaking around behind my back. Sarah looked up at me, confusion in her eyes. What do you mean? I leaned back, considering my next move carefully. We redefined the terms. You can keep seeing him, if that's what you want. And I'll do what I want. But we don't lie anymore. No more sneaking around. No more games. We make it work, on our terms. Her face was a mixture of shock and disbelief. She hadn't expected this, and frankly, neither had I. But at that moment, it felt like the only way to move forward. I don't know if I can do that, she whispered, her voice shaky. I don't know if I can handle that. You don't have a choice, Sarah. I said it calmly, as if it were the most rational thing in the world. Either we try this, or we end it now. Those are your options. She stared at me, her face pale, as if I'd just presented her with a death sentence. And in a way, I had. The days following our conversation were tense, to say the least. Sarah didn't respond to my proposal right away. She walked around the house in a daze, avoiding eye contact, staying silent for long stretches. I could tell she was thinking it over, weighing her options, but the truth was, she didn't really have any. I'd laid it out clearly. We either try to make this work on new terms, or we end it. I knew she wasn't ready to walk away from everything we had, and deep down, I wasn't either. But we both knew that nothing would ever be the same. A week passed before she finally brought it up. We were sitting in the kitchen, eating dinner in near silence when she put her fork down and took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, her voice shaky. About the open relationship. I didn't say anything at first, just nodded, waiting for her to continue. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that, she admitted, her eyes flicking up to meet mine for a second before darting away again. But I don't want to lose you either. I don't want to end this. Her words hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. I could tell she wasn't convinced this was the right path, but she felt cornered. And I was willing to bet Mark wasn't pushing her to leave me either. Maybe he liked the thrill of sneaking around, but he wasn't signing up to take my place. That thought, strangely enough, gave me some satisfaction. Then we try it, I said simply. We lay it all out on the table. No more hiding, no more lies. We set some boundaries, but other than that, we're free to see who we want. She winced at that, her face tight with discomfort, but she nodded. Okay, she whispered. We'll try. It was decided, just like that. No dramatic showdown, no storming out or slamming doors. We agreed to open our marriage like it was a logical, inevitable next step, but I knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of something darker, something neither of us could control. The first few weeks were awkward. I'd see her texting on her phone, and I knew it was Mark. She was careful at first, asking permission before she went to see him, making sure I wasn't upset. I told her I didn't care. It was part of the deal. The truth was, I did care. Every time she left the house, saying she was going to meet a friend, I felt that familiar twist in my gut, but I wouldn't let her see it. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing that it hurt. In retaliation, or maybe just to prove a point, I started seeing other women too. It wasn't hard. After all, the lines of fidelity had already been crossed, and I wasn't exactly a stranger to infidelity myself. I went out a few times, met a woman or two, flirted, let things go where they would. I didn't love any of it. It felt more like a game than anything else, a way to prove to myself, and to Sarah, that I could play by these new rules too. But each time I came back home, I found myself more hollow than before. As for Sarah, she wasn't handling it well. At first, she seemed relieved, like maybe this new arrangement was the key to relieving the pressure that had been suffocating us. But as time went on, she grew more anxious, more distant. She started sleeping even less than before, spending more time away from home. Her eyes were always red, like she'd been crying, though she never admitted it. One night, after she'd come back from seeing Mark, she sat down next to me on the couch and said, "I don't think I can do this." I looked at her, waiting for her to explain. I thought this would make things better, or at least easier, but it's making me feel worse, she confessed. Every time I see him, I feel guilty. And when I come home, I feel even worse because I know you're doing the same thing. So what? I replied, keeping my voice calm. Isn't this what you wanted? You're the one who cheated, Sarah. You're the one who started this. She winced at the accusation, but I didn't let up. We agreed on this. You wanted to keep him in your life, and this was the only way. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking, but I can't handle it. It's tearing me apart. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, the nights she came home late, smelling of someone else. I hardened myself against the guilt. If you can't handle it, then what do you suggest? Do you want to end it all? She shook her head furiously, her hands twisting in her lap. No, I don't want to end it. I don't want a divorce. I don't know what to do anymore. There it was. The helplessness, the confusion. She was crumbling under the weight of her own decisions, and I watched her, wondering if this was what I had wanted all along. To see her broken, to make her suffer the way I had suffered. But it wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. In fact, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. We sat there in silence, the tension between us thick and suffocating. After a while, she got up and went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The weeks that followed were worse. Sarah withdrew completely, retreating into herself in a way I'd never seen before. She stopped seeing Mark as often, and when she did, she didn't talk about it. She didn't ask where I went when I left the house, and I stopped telling her. It was like we were living in parallel lives, passing each other in the halls, but never truly connecting. One day, I came home from work to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. Her face was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept in days. I could tell something was wrong, something more than just the stress of our crumbling marriage. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said quietly, not even looking at me. That caught me off guard. "Why?" I asked, more curious than anything. "I need help," she whispered. "I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time." I didn't know what to say. The part of me that had been so angry for so long wanted to lash out, to tell her this was all her fault, that she was the one who had destroyed everything. But looking at her now, I realized something. She was breaking down, piece by piece, and I was the one who had pushed her there. It wasn't just the affair that had caused this. It was the months of manipulation, the cold indifference, The way I had used her guilt to control her. I had trapped her in this arrangement, forcing her to play by my rules, and now she was falling apart because of it. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry for everything." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something. Pity, maybe, or regret. I wasn't sure. But it wasn't enough to change anything. Not yet. "I think we need to talk about what comes next," I said, my voice firm. Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes again. And I knew then that whatever came next, it wouldn't be easy. For either of us. After that night, everything changed. Sarah's breakdown had been coming for a while, but I hadn't expected it to hit so hard, so suddenly. She became a shadow of herself, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. The woman I had married, the one who had cheated, lied, and betrayed me, was slipping through my fingers, but not in the way I had imagined. This wasn't the result of some dramatic confrontation or final act of revenge. It was quieter, more insidious, and it was unraveling both of us. The therapy sessions became more frequent, and soon, Sarah was spending more time with her therapist than she was with me. She didn't talk about what they discussed, not directly, but I could see the effects. She'd come home looking exhausted, emotionally drained, like she had been digging up parts of herself she'd buried long ago. And maybe she had. She became more withdrawn, more distant, and for the first time in our marriage, I started to realize how deep her pain went. It wasn't just about the affair, though that was part of it, of course. It was about everything. The years of emotional neglect, the secrets we kept from each other, the silent resentment that had been building up between us long before Mark ever entered the picture. The open relationship had been a disaster, and though I had thought it was a way to regain control, it had only pushed Sarah closer to the edge. One night, after one of her sessions, she sat me down at the kitchen table. Her hands were trembling, and she couldn't quite meet my eyes. I knew something big was coming. "I need to leave," she said quietly. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her correctly. "What do you mean, leave?" "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't stay here, in this house, in this relationship. It's destroying me. I'm not getting better. I'm getting worse." I stared at her, my chest tight. I should have seen this coming, but it still hit me like a punch to the gut. "So, that's it?" I asked, my voice cold. "You're just walking away?" She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I don't want to, but I have to. For my own sanity, for my health. My therapist, she says I need space. I need to be on my own for a while, to figure out who I am without all of this." "All of this," I repeated bitterly. "You mean me?" "No," she said quickly, her voice pleading. "That's not what I mean. I need to heal, and I can't do that here. Every day, I'm reminded of everything that's happened. Every fight, every lie, every mistake. It's suffocating." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to tell her she was running away, that she was abandoning me just when things were finally coming to light. But when I looked at her, all I saw was someone who was completely broken. She wasn't running away. She was trying to survive. "So, what's the plan?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll move out," she said softly. "Just for a while. We can still talk, figure out what to do next. But I can't stay here." I leaned back in my chair, staring at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to fight her on this, to tell her she was making a mistake, that leaving wouldn't solve anything. But another part of me, a quieter part, knew she was right. Our house had become a battlefield, and no amount of compromise could change that. We were both trapped, and maybe, just maybe, space was the only thing that could offer either of us a chance at healing. "Fine," I said finally, the word heavy in my mouth. "Do what you need to do." Sarah let out a breath, relief flooding her face. She looked at me with gratitude, but I couldn't return it. Not yet. I was too hurt, too numb. She was leaving, and in some twisted way, I felt like she had one. A week later, Sarah moved out. She found a small apartment across town, nothing fancy, just enough for her to have her own space. I helped her pack, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. The house felt empty after she left. The silence was suffocating, but I refused to reach out to her. I figured she needed the space, and I told myself I did too. The first few days were the hardest. I found myself walking through the house, remembering how things used to be. The kitchen table where we'd shared meals, the couch where we'd watched TV together, the bedroom where we'd laughed, argued, and once loved each other. It all felt like a distant memory, like someone else's life. And I wondered if we could ever get it back. I started seeing someone too, not a therapist, but a lawyer. I didn't want to admit that things were headed toward divorce, but I had to be prepared. If Sarah was really gone for good, I needed to protect myself. I needed to make sure that when the time came, I wouldn't be left with nothing. The lawyer laid it out for me in cold, hard terms: division of assets, custody of our shared life, financial obligations. It all sounded so clinical, so impersonal, and I hated every second of it. But the truth was, Sarah wasn't fighting me on any of it. She wasn't pushing for anything unreasonable. In fact, she was bending over backward to avoid a messy, drawn-out divorce. I think part of her still hoped we could work things out, that the separation wasn't the end. But I wasn't so sure. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe we had already crossed the point of no return. Then came the day that broke me. Sarah had been gone for about a month when she called me. Her voice was shaky, and I could tell something was wrong. "I need to talk to you," she said. "Can we meet?" I agreed, reluctantly, and we arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table near the window, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. She looked pale, thinner than the last time I'd seen her, and there was a nervous energy about her that set me on edge. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice soft, but steady. "About everything. About us." I didn't say anything, just nodded, waiting for her to continue. I think we need to end this," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "For real this time." The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I felt like the world had stopped. I had been expecting this, of course. I had prepared for it. But hearing her say it, making it real, was like a punch to the gut. "I can't keep doing this," she continued, her voice breaking. "I can't keep hoping things will get better when I know they won't. We've hurt each other too much. We've broken too many things that can't be fixed." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "So, that's it? You want a divorce?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't want to fight. I don't want to make this any harder than it has to be. I just want us both to be free." Free. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. This wasn't freedom. This was failure. "Bye,"